So good morning to you all. Welcome. My name is Bart Goldenberg, and I'm your presenter for a two-part boot camp. The first part, we're going to cover something I'd like to call engaged customer strategy. And in the second part, I'd like to look at how CRM impacts that strategy. So I had the pleasure of starting this conference about 13 years ago, and I chaired it for the first 5 years. The vision was this would be the Salt Lick for the CRM industry, where people would come and kind of rub shoulders and talk to one another, share stories, and I hope that does happen during your experience over the next few days as well. About 33 years ago, I started a company here in Bethesda, Maryland, just up the road, that specialized in applying technology to business. I've had the pleasure of working with some of the best companies in the world on using technology. It started out many years ago, CRM. I'm going to reveal some other technologies I think that are very important for engaging customers. I've had the pleasure of writing a couple of books. The last one is a copy for you, just a compliment of thanking you for coming for the conference. The company looks at how we brief executives on a variety of different topics, whether it's CRM or social media or e-commerce or emerging technologies or identity resolution or customer experience, the topics that are around this. We'll touch upon all of those. We'll also come in and look at how effectively you're doing any of that. We'll assess how effectively you're using the various processes and tools that support your customer engagement. And then we create the strategies and help implement them. So that's the business. We've had the pleasure of doing that for some of the world's best companies. We're very honored by that. You know, I put up the big names because you'll know them. We also work with medium-sized companies as well. But what I like about some of these companies, and I'll tell you some of their stories as we move through today, is their willingness to utilize new processes and make the transformation to using technology creatively. And I'll share those stories with you. If you want to learn more about any of these companies or the background of us, I have a booth downstairs, number 206. I'm here for the 3 days. Delighted to chat further if you have unique or specific questions about your business. With that in mind, let's kick off. The hashtag, by the way, if you're tweeting, is CRM Evolution. And this is part one of 2 parts. Here's where I come from. You listened to, how many of you were in Brian's session this morning? Please raise your hand. Okay, you know, it was a good keynote, but it left me greatly troubled because I think he missed some of the bigger points that are happening in the marketplace, and I'll share those with you momentarily. Not that he was wrong in any way. He was brilliant, and I liked what he did. I just thought he told us half the story. And so where I'm coming from on that is, it would be my observation that increasingly we're working in what I like to call a digital deluge. And if you look at the figures up on the screen, we're going to go from what is 11 billion devices around the world today to 80 billion devices over the next 7 or 8 years. You know, that's an 8-fold increase. It's not huge, but it's not insignificant. But what is significant is the amount of data that's being created. From 8 zettabytes, and a zettabyte is, for those that want to know, it's 2 to the 22nd bytes, 2 to the 21st bytes. We're going to go from 11 zettabytes, from 8 zettabytes to 180 zettabytes. And that represents a 22-fold increase. And that's happening because there's going to be more devices, and there's more sensors on the devices or in the devices. And I don't know about your companies, but the companies that I have the pleasure of working with, they're very concerned with all of this data. What do you do with it? If I'm gathering and trying to utilize data that's irrelevant to my business, I've wasted my time. If I'm gathering and utilize data that's relevant to my business, that's a good use of my time. So how do we differentiate between what is relevant data and what is irrelevant data? And every company is challenged with this question. How do you thrive in what I'd like to call the digital deluge? So no surprise that almost 80% of all businesses are now taking digital transformation as their number one priority. But as my distinguished colleague Ginger Conlon, who's speaking with, at the same time as me, we had dinner last night. Digital transformation doesn't happen overnight, And the biggest mistake one can make is to try to rush digital transformation. So the question is, as it says in blue, how do you capture, how do you retain, and how do you grow customers who they themselves are awash in this digital sea? And you sit back, at least I do, and you ask these types of questions. What is it about Borders Books or some of the travel agencies that fail to understand this digital transformation, to utilize the data as Airbnb or as vacation rental by owner, or as, and we could go on in the list, began to utilize it? What is it, what did they not understand, and why did they lose their way, and you know the result of that? Or you take companies like Ile or Blue Shield of California, both of which are clients of ours. You know, they're kind of finding their way. How many of you drink Ile coffee? Raise your hand. Okay, it's from Italy. It's a good coffee. Not the best in the world, not the worst in the world. It's a good coffee. But they look at their marketplace as one big market, and all of you the exact same, you know, profile. You all get the same messages. And in my opinion, they're learning their way. A wonderful company, but learning their way. Think of yourselves as Blue Shield of California, millions of customers that are buying health insurance. The question then becomes, how do you listen carefully and work with your clients who look at health insurance as sometimes one of the biggest complications in their lives? And I think they're finding their way. They're definitely not leading the way. And then you look over to the far right at companies like Starbucks or Tesla, Amazon, Apple, those types of companies. And for reasons I'll share with you shortly, I would observe they're leading the way. And these are companies that have understood quite some time ago that data is tremendously valuable, not all data, but understanding the profile of your customer and leveraging that data through the channels of choice that the customer wants to do to transpire business with you. So I sit back and ask myself, some have lost their way, some are learning their way, some are leading the way. Is there a formula? Is there a recipe? Is there something that's allowing them to succeed where others are not? And that is, in fact, the theme of my fourth book that's coming out this year, and it's called Engage Custom Strategy, A Roadmap to Success in 2030. And I actually think there is a recipe. I think there is a formula, and I'd like to share that with you today. So it starts out with the data, with that deluge of data, and my observation, it can come from three different types of sources. We have on the far left, and these are the little buckets down here in blue or purple. So traditional data, point of sale, what did you buy, when did you buy it? ERP systems, back office, what was shipped, when was it shipped? Loyalty programs. There's a bunch of what might be called transactional data where we are gathering insight from what a customer has transacted with us. And very important, future behavior based on past behavior. In the middle is what this conference is about, CRM data. Could be sales pipeline data. It could be marketing, who responded to what type of offers, online, offline, et cetera. Could be customer service data, which customers have contacted us, what issues are being escalated, how effectively are we addressing them. And there's a third bucket of data that I'd like to call an increasingly important piece of data called third-party data. So I work with Axiom and Experian and some of the bigger data companies in the world. And you know, they really do have a lot of information, hopefully safely, that they keep from us or for us or on us, but they are an important component in understanding customers, and lots of companies are buying that data for what are called third-party data overlays. And what we have there is not just the Experian and Axioms who are looking at demographic and psychographic and lifestyle, but we actually have industry-specific third-party data. So almost every industry now has a couple of sources that are looking specifically at industry data. So here's the good news in the attempt to gather and utilize data. It's tremendously more rich in terms of the amount of data and the quality of the data that we are able to gather, and that's positive. There are also better use of APIs that are allowing us to take this data, if you will, and integrate it together to put it inside what is the holistic customer profile, so our understanding of our customer. And that's the good news. The bad news is that much of the data that we're gathering today is offline data. ERP systems, CRM systems, and some but not all of the third party are typically offline data. And the question then becomes, how can you possibly create a profile and address your customers or prospects if you don't have both sides of the equation, offline and online. And about 5 years ago, companies out in the Silicon Valley, for the most part, created a tool called identity resolution. Could you just raise your hands if you're comfortable with that tool? Okay, I typically get this now, and it's not anything to feel bad about, but I want you to be aware of it because it is the tool that is able to integrate offline and online data so that when we then create our holistic profile, we're not looking at what the customer has done, et cetera, offline, but we're looking at both offline and online data so we can better create the right product for the right customer at the right time, et cetera. So let me share with you what is identity resolution, and I would encourage you to learn more about this, by the way. It's very important as we move forward. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Up the road in Bethesda, Maryland, I've got a few old Jags. It's just my hobby. It's what I like to do. I've got a beautiful, I sold the 54 and the 83. These are the ones I had to sell to pay for university. So I paid for university by selling these, but I've got these three now. I enjoy the one on the left driving with my son. We do slalom racing and Concours d'Elegance, and a few of the other events that we do. And that's just my hobby. And Jaguar, called Manhattan Jaguar, which is in Rockville, Maryland, they know an awful lot about BART. They know I own 3 Jaguars. They know what year they are. They know how many miles are on it. They know what shows I belong to. They do all kinds of things. Every time I enter into a slalom race, and we do a couple of those a year with the Jaguar Owners Club here in Washington, D.C., I have to fill out the national form. They know who's BART, what's he racing, when's he racing, et cetera. When we go to the Concours d'Elegance in various places around Virginia and Maryland, and there's some beautiful visits we make, they know which car I took, and I have to register, et cetera. This was the parade in Washington, D.C. This is one of the concours out in Virginia. So they know all about me, and they know an awful lot about me. They know that I subscribe to multiple magazines. They know my name and how often I subscribe and what I subscribe to. They know I belong to the Jaguar National Capital Areas Owner Club. They know that, well, let's stop there for a minute. So that's what they know about me offline. All this stuff, I've filled out forms. I've been online, but it's largely offline data about BART. But BART also spends an awful lot of time visiting multiple Jaguar websites because I like to talk about Jaguars and cars and things like that. So I visit the local websites, the Jaguar Owners Club, and this is the main Jaguar one, but I visit international sites as well because there's some very interesting things going on overseas with Jaguars. I also get on a lot of social media and share stories. What do you like? Yours is broke. How did you fix it? And so forth. And Jaguar is a customer of mine for many years. It's Jaguar Land Rover. And I always joke with them, how well do you really know BART? And they say, well, we know you have 3 cars. And I say, well, that's interesting. But shouldn't you know at a minimum that I'm an enthusiast that goes beyond the 3 cars? And I ask the question, shouldn't you know that I'm actually in the market for what's called an F-type, which is a $100,000+ car, but all that is done online. The showrooms don't necessarily take my name down when I drive it. We drive it with friends, and I do this all online. And if you were Jaguar Land Rover and you really felt that it was important to understand Bart Goldenberg as a customer, wouldn't it be in your best interest to monitor just as effectively my online behavior as it is to understand my offline behavior? Everybody with me so far? And that's the tool called identity resolution, where you're able, once you've gathered online and offline data, to target your loyal customers, to engage both online and offline data so that you can then come back out with personalized, customized messaging, offers, approaches. You can set metrics to measure how effectively BART has responded, and that then begin to impact both your sales, marketing, and service efforts. And if you think about this for a minute, if we're able to do that, then what we've just done is we've taken our kind of older data sets and we've enhanced them with our online data set. And we're now in a position to create holistic customer profiles in a way, quite frankly, this industry has not been able to do until in the last few years. And to me, that's very exciting. And that's very valuable and very important as you move forward in understanding both the digital deluge and as you want to engage your customers more effectively. So this holistic profile. I wrote an article in 1986 about the profile. It didn't quite look like this. But what I said is I think of it as a daisy. the flower, a daisy, and you put the customer in the center of the profile. This is, I think this is Schlumberger, the big oil field services company. And you look at these as petals of information around that particular customer. And you ask yourself, what information should I know, do I know about that customer, so that when I go to sell to them, to market to them, to service them, to approach them, to make sure I understand who they are and optimize their experience in doing business with me. Now, this is not a wrong profile, it's not a right profile, it's just generic profile. Contact information, alerts about what we need to do with the customer, activities from the sales force, purchase products this year versus last year, value of the customer, new opportunities, any outstanding quotes, customer service, issues today, issues from the past, so we don't step on a landmine, dealer information in this particular case, who they buy their particular products from. And there's the digital insight petal, marketing, et cetera. And you create this over a 12 to 18 month period. You know, it's quite astonishing to me. I would argue probably 80, maybe 90% of companies that I have the pleasure of working with still don't have truly holistic profiles. And the reason, as you all know, is it's hard to put all this together. They're in different departments of information. Some people don't have complete information. The information is dirty, it's wrong. There's all kinds of reasons why profiles are hard to put together. But I just logically ask the obvious question, and that is, and I'll talk about this more in the second half in the part 2 of the bootcamp. I asked the logical question, how can we possibly want to be able to engage our customers effectively if we really don't understand who they are? Does that make perfect sense to everybody? I mean, can you just show of hands how many people feel you have a very good holistic profile of your customers? Please raise your hand. You see, and so we got 2 of them. And yet, by the way, maybe you can tell your story in a minute. I'll come back to you. But, you know, a lot of companies want to be there. It's not that there's not, but there's, you know, there's Post-its, there's information in Excel spreadsheets, there's information in databases, there's information in the minds of the salesperson that's leaving the company. There's all kinds of information. And then there's the other thing that I also argue, and that is, and I refer to it as a flower, because anybody that, you know, is a horticulturalist and works with flowers knows that sometimes a petal dies. It dies because the information is not relevant in this case, or it dies because it didn't get water in the case of a flower. You pull a dead petal so that new petals can grow. And often what happens inside a company is we fail to acknowledge that a particular petal is run its course. And we got to get rid of that data and open up new petals. So 12 to 18 month process, I think this is very critical, because if you are able to get holistic profiles, then you can begin the customer engagement process. So what do? With very good holistic customer profiles, you begin to use your data analytics to understand clustering, targets, channel of preference of channels, etc. And the data overlay sits, data analytics sits on top of the profile and begins to look at those segments and those clusters, etc. And a lot of companies are doing the data analytics effectively. You know, I often hear this is a Forrester study that was just completed. We can't get an omni-channel view of our customers. Therefore, we don't have the ability to integrate online and offline data. We have too many data sources, and we therefore can't utilize the technology to get the data. And I just say,